Welcome back to another episode of City's Blood Podcast. I'm Phil DeCero.
I'm Alexis Terevko.
And we have a special guest today. I've been trying to get this guy on here for a long time. This is my good friend, Bruce Handley. Say hello, Bruce.
How you doing? Good to be here, Phil.
Thank you for coming out. Bruce is, Jared and I joke that you're the most interesting man in the world. You ever see those beer commercials, about
right.
Yeah. Only because it's some of the crazy stories, that I've heard from you over the years, that just, the frog story.
Yeah.
A lot of the other ones they're awesome. And I don't know any other mountain climbers. Nobody's ever sent me a postcard from Nepal. It's you're a pretty cool guy, Bruce.
Well, yeah. It was a fun time.
So anyways, this podcast is about Murder Mountain, the documentaries that it's on Netflix. Not so much about that documentary, but about Alderpoint and that entire area up in, is it Humboldt County, Bruce?
Well, it's the whole
Triangle.
the Emerald Triangle of Trinity, Humboldt, Mendocino County.
Now,
That's kind of where it all started.
The reason why Bruce is on here, besides being, just the most interesting guy we know, is he actually owned property up there. He was part of that community for how many years?
Probably owned property for 20 years, involved there for maybe 35 years. Yeah. Started maybe in 1977, I think. I was in Leggett and was there for 11 years and then took a little hiatus and was back up in Xenia in Trinity County about 1987-ish, maybe 87, and stayed there for a while.
Now, I'm gonna put some maps up here to try to show the area. Bruce gave me a tour via Google Earth, which was pretty interesting. But that thing there, you have that folder. Can you hold that thing up? See?
Can you see it?
Yeah, that entire. Well, the camera should pick it up, no problem. And I'll get a close up before we leave. That's good, Bruce. That's how long did it take that project to do, and what was that?
This was about all the little different colors here. This is the main stem Eel River watershed from essentially Island Mountain to up to Bridgeport, and about 45-50 miles. And all these little colored dots are what are known as sub-watershed units. They're delineated by the state and the federal government. My job is a restoration ecologist, focusing on streams and upland conditions that affect streams. This was a great area. It's a great area to do work for several reasons. Number one, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate of tectonics actually go right through Garberville, essentially. So everything west of Garberville, if you drive around that area, you see it's mostly coniferous forest. On the east side, on the North American Plate, you get more scattered oak pasture land. You do have some conifers. So it's a whole different dynamic there. Well, with the two plates there, you have movement, so there's instability in the watershed. The soil characteristics of the watershed are highly erosive, and so from some past logging practices in the 50s, a lot of erosion got into the main stem of the Eel River, and salmon were having a hard time finding gravels to make redds to lay their eggs. So what I did was identify spots that needed to be fixed in one way or another, and usually they were old logging roads that crossed a tributary to the creek. And it was estimated that there was about a 35-year backup of erosion in the river. So that's what took me to the main stem and the Xenia. and I worked there, first off mapping a lot of that, and then secondly implementing some work. And implementing meant in-stream repairs where a lot of the bridges that go over the river weren't angled properly, and there's a lot of erosion that's carried by that. A lot of the subdivisions up there, back to Landers, the roads are terrible. So we'd go in and do the roads and grade them properly and rock them, put the culverts in that are necessary and try to stabilize them. So that took quite a while. So that was essentially what happened in there.
How many years did you work up and down that area? I mean,
Well, if you take Mendocino County, it was probably 11 years of working up there. And then I did have a break where I worked with the Nature Conservancy and became their director of the habitat restoration team there. And so I had statewide responsibilities, and I had the really cool job of working on almost all the major rivers in California. So
then you just walk these rivers?
Yeah, these rivers here, we would get out if we were doing in-stream work. We'd get out and we'd walk the rivers, and we would look at them, and I'd do that with my contractor. And we would say, oh, look, what do we need to do here? Well, we need to get a redwood root stock, and that'll stabilize that slide and that erosion. But to do that, they cost $1,100. It cost about $800 to have it shipped down there. You hire a CCC crew, and it takes them a week to get that fixed where you're confident that it's going to stay there. So each of those is a pretty big investment. And then down in Mendocino County, I cut my teeth, actually, in the restoration business there on Bridges Creek. Yeah. I used to own the headwaters of Bridges Creek, and there were some road issues there again, early logging practices.
Now the big damage that you're talking about is erosion to the riverbed? Or?
Yeah. In order to get the salmon back, you've got to get rid of the sediment. You get rid of the sediment.
You need rock.
You need flow. You don't need rock. You need to have more going out than's coming in. So when you go to these little tributaries and you fix them with weirs or whatever little structure you want to put there that's going to work, there's that much less going into the river. And particularly here on the, almost all of this area is on the North American plate. And so a lot of these ranches, there were little subdivisions. So people would sell them off. The Rancho Sequoia, which is, in essence, it is Murder Mountain. Murder Mountain is not Alderpoint.
Before this was pot country, this was cattle country?
Exactly. And what they would do is they're small ranches, 4,000 acres. A big one could be 40,000. Usually multi-generational. And they would graze cattle. And let's say the market was a little depressed that year, they may cut some trees. So they weren't in the business of clear cutting.
They cut the trees to sell them.
To break even that year.
Okay.
Keep the ranch afloat. So then, a lot of ones that I mentioned, there maybe 3 or 4 in here that were turned into subdivisions. Anywhere ranging from Hanson Ranch could be, I don't know how many plots are there. There's a lot. I don't know, 20 miles of road or something, 13 miles of road.
But these homes aren't side to side like a suburban subdivision.
They're, probably minimum 40 acres. I think Rancho Sequoia's minimum, they probably have 5 and 10 acre sites.
So when you're walking along these rivers, how many different properties are you passing through, and has it ever gotten to the point where it's hairy? Because I'm sure just to get water to some of their crops, there had to be some of these guys taking advantage of the river.
Not so much the river, but they took advantage of every tributary. And that's one of the issues that, we can talk about In the early days, my early days as a hippie, the Back to the Land movement was in starting. And so a lot of people moved up into the mountains, and they wanted to develop community. And we did. We had great times. A lot of them grew pot. No big farms, 60 plants maybe. Yeah. And but with the proceeds of this pot operations, they built fire stations that they needed. They financed fire trucks. They augmented schools. They built the community centers. So there was a lot of giving back to the community of the early Back to the Landers. And
so the marijuana in those days, you're talking about the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
This was a solution for a town with an ailing economy. There's a former lumber area, probably a depressed economy, not too many jobs to be had. And so here's a way to supplement the income. And they're just making their area better. Let's have a library. Let's make the library better. Let's give the police an extra car. Something like that.
Well, there was an option. When we first moved up there was a lot of tension. Hippies and loggers, tree huggers, loggers. And that all got worked out pretty soon. And then you found the loggers were then dope growers. Learned from the Back to Landers.
Didn't you tell me you had a bunch of them show up and help you out with something?
Best feeling in my life. It happened in a climbing fall. I dislocated and separated my shoulder. And this was in April. And I needed 5 cord of firewood to get through the winter. So that wasn't going to happen. So I was thinking of moving back to, where I can, Santa Rosa or somewhere like that, Forestville where I'd been. And stay there. And it's an interesting story. My job, there was a Judge Golden that froze Mendocino County's general plan, and nobody could build until they got the zoning issues straightened out. And so the county was divided into little areas, and I became kind of a facilitator for the area around Leggett. And of course, it was one where, you want everybody to have 160 acres, but you only want to be able to build on 5 acres. That kind of dynamic. And it was tough going. And between Back to Landers and loggers, it was a hard project to work. I mean, it was hard. The community hadn't really knitted together by that time.
Everybody hated everybody.
Principally, it was the two sides, your Furris or Guinness. So the meetings were interesting to say the least. But when I did my shoulder and word got out that I had separated, I needed firewood. I'm looking down. My driveway was 2.5 miles long, climbed 1,300 feet. So one day we're looking, and you could look down off of our deck, and you could see the dust just flying up from our roads. I mean, more than one car. And so lo and behold, all these loggers who on Tuesday nights I was arguing and fighting with came up there, and they cut and split. You guys know how to use a chainsaw. 5 cord of firewood for me in one day. And we went out and we partied that night. And we had a great time. I asked him, I says, well, why did you do this? He says, it's just too much fun to kick your ass on Tuesday nights, so we couldn't let you go. So that was the feeling of fabric. Yeah. The feeling of community to me. And it's been, to this day, the strongest feeling I've had of community was those guys who, became tankerous on Tuesday, coming up and realizing we are a community and we help one another.
These were the guys on the other side of the fence, the loggers who had inadvertently done the damage over the years. Yeah, and there's no blame. And you're the restoration hippie.
Yeah, there's just no blame. I mean, in those days you wanted to blame them, but these guys who built roads in the 50s around logging, they were using the best practices. People just didn't know. The science wasn't there. So to blame them is really unjust, I think. And I particularly learned that very well working here. As I say, where the small ranch is 4,000, a big ranch is 40,000. Multi-generations. They may have been 4 generations there. These people came up and said, I know my dad made a lot of this erosion. And he didn't know any better. And I want to fix it. And that's why you're here. So that was a good relationship to see those people doing that. And I thought one of the good things, you get up in the mountains and you get a little isolated.
Yeah.
You know, it's tough. My nearest neighbor was 45 minutes to drive down in second gear and drive up his road in second gear to see him.
No, you had a 2-mile driveway. How big a piece of property was
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, it was 360 acres.
360 acres.
And
This, the town Xenia, you said you had an interesting story about how it got its name, because I had never even heard about it.
Oh,
I looked it
Xenia.
up on the map, and it's...
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get all this accurate in the first part, but it's an interesting story. It was originally called Poison Camp. And it was called Poison Camp years ago because cattle would die. And the landowners thought it was the Indians poisoning the cattle. And come to find out, there is a plant up there that cattle can't eat. It'll poison them.
Oh.
And that was what it was. But the town was called Poison Camp. And then they wanted to get a post office there, so the postal system, I guess, made them change their name. And so the postmistress at the time and her daughter were in the post office, and they had one of those little planter boxes on the windows, and they had zinnias in them.
Yeah.
So they were thinking, well, why don't we call the town Xenia? And that's how it got its name. But unfortunately, they didn't know how to spell the flower name Xenia, which has 2 N's. So the town of Xenia is a Z-E-N-I-A, you know, with just 1 N.
Which is a female
So
name, right?
Kind of interesting. Yeah.
Excellent.
So it's kind of a cool when you could hear about like a historical town story like that.
Yeah.
You know, especially when you think, oh, the natives were killing all the cattle, and really it was something they were grazing on.
Yeah. Those were days, weren't they?
Yeah.
The bloodier or the grimmer side of this area, because you did nothing but positive work up there, but that area, you know, unfortunately after the 70s and the 80s happened, it kind of drew in a different crowd.
Yeah.
You know, that was just there for the money, that was just there for the weed, and it seems like things got a little bit uglier up there. I know when I first came here to California, guys used to joke about, oh, the weed just grows on the side of the road up there in Humboldt County, just pull over and pick it kind of thing. And I can just imagine getting shot, you know, doing something stupid like that.
Really?
But you had to go through all these different properties. I saw the map with all those dots all over it. I mean, how many times did you have a gun pulled on you, or anything hairy happen?
Yeah, twice. One maybe once, and then once the guy had the gun on the side, you know.
Yeah.
On the side of the river. One of the cute stories, though, is my contractor and I were out walking the main stem heel, looking for things to do and what we needed to do, and mapping it out and getting cost estimates, stuff like that. And this was when camp started, and they had helicopters.
Yeah.
And they would train people before the season, before harvest. And so one time, here comes this helicopter over, and it stops when it sees the 2 of us walking in the river.
Yeah.
And out comes a platform from it, and the guy starts photographing us. And so I did a lot of photography up there because pictures are good for these cost estimates. So we had this battle of us shooting them with a camera and them shooting down on us as a camera. I'm sure they thought we were going to be growing or something in there. That was kind of a cute thing. Yeah. But the early days, one of the cool things about it is we had a co-op, a food co-op. And you'd meet every 2 weeks. And what it would do, it would take people for the remote areas like Bell Springs Road or Spy Rock Road, and it would bring them down into the Leggett store or the gymnasium. And we would order everything we needed. And truckloads would come up in 2 weeks. So one 2-week period would be ordering whatever you wanted from the co-op, or Jared, whatever you wanted from the co-op.
Yeah.
And then the next 2 weeks would be dividing it up. The truck would just drop everything off, and I remember I had the job of cutting cheese wheels. You know, I got pretty good at estimating cheese, but you know, you may get sliced this big, this, and then he doesn't have enough, so it may narrow down. But the point of it is, it was a time where we could find out what's happening in the mountains, what you're doing.
Yeah.
There was a lot of building going on and construction. So how can I help you, or, you know, help another person, and also just catch up on things. You know, that was part of the fabric I was talking about, the early days. So then, kind of a little short-sighted of back-to-landers to think that they could grow a little pot and find out that there was a good amount of profit in that, and and they so you started to see bigger grows, and then you started to see paranoia come in. Harvest time was real paranoia. The early days they were fixed-wing aircraft, but later on they were helicopter. And when you get your place buzzed, a lot of the folks had horses and stuff.
Yeah.
So that plane had come over low and slow, and those horses go crazy. So they're, getting big cuts on the fences they were trying to rub up and get out of. So that harvest time was pretty paranoid. And then as it started to become more knowledge about the Emerald Triangle, and people started moving in for the intent and purpose of being a pot grower, not for being a community person or a back-to-lander or restoring the land or stuff. And then I guess, maybe 10 years ago, 10 to 15 maybe, you started seeing people planting larger plantings. A lot of them were done in public land in the forest. Yeah. And you wouldn't get near the poundage that anybody gets today, because they would be more in the shade and they'd be protected, and the species weren't that, people didn't know about the genetics and everything. And so as a result, it was tough. It was called guerrilla gardening. And these people would haul black polyline up into the mountains, and they would lay out these grows. And then you'd dig all these holes by hand under these trees and plant the pot, water the pot. So when the harvest came, a lot of people weren't motivated to go back up and clean up the sites. And as a result, there's a lot of black poly line that's affectionately known as Mendocino black snake. In fact, I have a friend over in Petrolia area who once said, if it wasn't for that black poly pipe, I'd mentioned how erosive the land was and earthquakes and unstable. He says, wasn't for that black poly pipe, probably half that mountain be down here by now. So they weren't always giving back to the land. They started taking from the land. So
was leaving the PVC a bad thing that inadvertently turned into a good thing, erosion-wise, or is that just a joke? No, it's a bad thing from the start. It's just a bad thing. People should have cleaned up their gardens. That's all I know about it. So then when pot became, 215 happened and it became more legal, the whole idea of having to hide your plants kind of went away. Don't have it. So you started to see people bring in dozers and doze off a 2-acre site and flatten it out and put up greenhouses that are a couple hundred feet long. I think we showed you some of those the other day on Google Earth. And then the rip-off factor.
So that was what, 95, 96?
Somewhere in that area.
Yeah, it was.
Time gets away from me.
Yeah.
But there was a movie called Homegrown or something like that back in the late 90s. Where they were showing the old rip-off artists. Some of them actually came in looking like cops, and things like that, and we'll try to raid the place. But
I know I got told a story by some people who are, they run the girl ranch.
Yeah.
And they said that, like on the last day that they all were there, somebody showed up with, SWAT gear and all that stuff, and they said, "Where's the safe?" Guys, like, it's in the office. They went and they literally blew the safe, took all the money, touched none of the weed, and left.
Huh.
Just rip off.
But they had, what were we going to do? They had M16s and like full squad. And I was like, were they cops? She was, I'm pretty sure some of them were cops.
Huh. Some odd stuff had happened. I fell 2 large Doug fir trees in order to build a house. And as a result, I did it with an Alaskan sawmill. I made the lumber. Well, every time you saw a log with an Alaskan sawmill, you got a 1/4 inch sawdust on each side of the board. Mm-hmm. So building 1-inch boards, you're just making sawdust. So you want to build studs, 4x4s, 2x4s, something like that. And with the slash, in the ends, the rounds of the cut of the log,
right?
I built a greenhouse down below my cabin where we grew vegetables. And we put the corrugated fiberglass siding and Dutch door in the front to keep the deer out. The back would open up for venting. And this is in the days of the fixed-wing aircraft. Bill Stewart, he was not a very nice law enforcement officer. He would trash your house. He'd leave it that way. He'd intentionally trash it, just to intimidate the hippies.
Yeah.
And so one time he was sure we had pot in our greenhouse. And we're out there one day, and here is this fixed-wing aircraft, and I'm at about a little under 3,000 feet elevation. And I'm looking down on this fixed-wing aircraft, and he's flying right towards, up the watershed, right towards my greenhouse.
Yeah.
And didn't see anything. But it was interesting. 2 days later, a sheriff came up and was looking for, quote, a lost girl. Now, a lot of kids would wander away. There was a state park down below.
Yeah.
But I think he was just snooping around, under the auspices of looking for this lost child.
So
I looked it up real quick. Is he the same officer that was killed?
Yeah, he's killed in Oklahoma. Yeah, he left Mendocino County. I think he went and became the state narc in Oklahoma, and a bad drug deal, he died.
Wow. Was killed. So the lost little girl thing, that makes me get back to the Murder Mountain documentary. They said, look, more people disappear in Mendocino County than in any other county in California.
Yeah.
Which I find hard to believe, just because you would think L.A., would be the place where runaways end up, type thing. But maybe they're not on the radar in the first place. I've also heard that, in the documentary, I think somebody said that, that's a place where people also go to disappear to. And I know you've said that too. That's where, people go to get away from it all, get away from other people.
Right.
I've also then seen, I know I'm getting the name of this wrong. I'll try to put it up if I can find it. But there's a guy who wrote a bunch of books, and apparently there's a documentary out about it too, about all the disappearances in state parks. And you were just saying about a state park near your property and a missing girl. What do you think? I've heard that in the documentary. I've heard some people say that it could have been a serial killer that's living up there and just preying upon, whatever. It could be trimmers that just disappear. It could be suicides.
It's interesting. As you see here, my office was in Alderpoint. And I'm pretty familiar with that area. Now, Alderpoint, it's a pretty rough town.
Yeah.
But Rancho Sequoia was really the place that you didn't want to be in. They were
scary.
It wouldn't be good for you to go in there uninvited.
No, is that because of the grow ranchers?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the caliber of grow ranchers. These people carried a lot of guns, and they were all about that. So, in fact, I think it was mentioned, they won't some people, when I would approach the association, you know, these little homeowner associations, if you will, they all have to pitch in to keep the roads up.
Right.
One of the big things I would hear is, I don't want you to be redoing our roads. It's our best line of defense. Well, for me, I'm thinking, dude, they got helicopters now. You know, they fly in. But in reality, it was the rip-off artists they wanted to keep out with bad roads. You know, somebody comes up with a, 87 Chevy or something and thinks they're going to get through these roads. They're going to break a lot of the car by the time they get there. So bad roads were a protection for the growers. And I think that was a time when the real dynamics started to change. And grows got bigger. Now today you go to these places and good road or bad road, somebody's on a motorcycle with a gun strapped over their shoulder and they're going to follow you down that road. And I remember one time out at Hanson Ranch, I was going to see a friend. I took the wrong turn and I took this terribly, all of a sudden about a mile in, I go, oh, this isn't the road I need to be on. And there was a guy on a motorcycle with a gun over his back following me. So I'm trying to turn around. And of course, he won't get off the motorcycle and help me, So I finally got turned around and I dropped a few names to the guy so he could, check my validity. And got back on out. But I think that's somewhat common practice, now. And rip-offs are a big thing. And
so they're patrolling their roads on dirt bikes with shotguns
and cameras. My place in Xenia, about the time I sold it, there was an operation down below me that made water hash. And my road in Xenia was about a mile long. And there were 3 cameras attached to trees when you drove down the mile of the road. And people would, follow you. So it wasn't like a motorcycle, because on this there were only 3 or 4 landowners. It wasn't like a big subdivision. I'm trying to think of
cameras back in the day. There's no Wi-Fi.
Like action cameras, those weren't around in those days.
So these were like run cables.
Pretty. They could operate them with batteries, and they would be more like security cameras,
almost like trail cams,
but not near as sophisticated as they are today.
Yeah,
I mean, no IR or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, but if they were, were they actually like being monitored real time? And if they were, that'd require, the old coax cable.
Yeah.
100 foot at a time, throw a repeater on it, go another 100. It's...
But all of these were principally at gates.
The gates.
Everybody had a gate.
Yeah.
On my Leggett property, I climbed...
for you, I'm just saying, not to interrupt you, but if they're like your property was, where you've got a 2-mile driveway, that's 2 miles of coax cable you'd have to run in order to be able to monitor that camera up the driveway in the 1970s or 80s.
Right. And you're finding they would be, like mine had 3 gates. And in those days, nobody closed the other 2. We just kind of left them open. It wasn't an issue. It wasn't an issue where you'd do anything like that. But it got to be an issue. And so I think I showed you that rock quarry that we got borrowed rock from.
Yes.
There was a rock quarry in Xenia that had beautiful rock. So and we got that and we used that for the roads in this one project. And Phil and I are looking at it the other day, and it's got greenhouses on on it when we saw it on Google.
Yeah.
So I guess they're everywhere, and I just kind of, as an old back to lander, I was kind of terrible the way it's being happened. From an ecological perspective, it really hurts because they've drained every one of those tributaries At least when I was working up there, you had some water. If you don't have water, you don't have a river. So the salmon are going to have to hitchhike on the highway to get up there. And that's kind of the state of things now. And
you're saying was it some type of brown rat or something?
Yeah, wood rats.
Wood rats. They destroyed their habitat up there, the growers.
Yeah, people that grow out in the forest, guerrilla growers, there were these wood rats, and they'd have 6 foot tall mound of twigs and branches that was their home. And they would go up and gnarl and girdle the base of your plants. And they were hard to get rid of. You know, these people aren't camping up there all 24/7,
right,
looking to get them. So people in wintertime would take a mix of half gas, half diesel, go up and burn them out. And I'm pretty convinced today that there aren't wood rats up there because of those actions. I mean, the growing scene, I could be mistaken, but my experience is the growing scene has extirpated the habitat for wood rats. So, and most of that was on public land, so.
Now, when you talk about the guerrilla growers, did they have an effect on the rivers?
Not so much. Any land disturbance they did was digging.
Okay.
And putting up fencing. They didn't grade anything in those days. So, minimal impact. Today, a lot of the problems come from the, illegal grading and the erosion caused by that after the first rain. Heavier traffic on the roads, so you're having more erosion generated by the roads. But all of that, coupled with the less water to flush the sediment out to the ocean, is in a worse predicament today than it was 15 years ago. And it's sad. And the amount of pesticides and chemicals that they're using today.
So who's doing the work that you were doing up there now?
It beats me. I don't know. I think I mentioned I was chairman at one time of the California Forest Stewardship Council. And that was a group that allocated monies for resource improvements, resource stewardship from Farm Bill money. So it was all done by grants. I would talk with a landowner and I would say, I'm trying to find one here, I would say, you've got a lot of different places here that we need to, it's hard to see, but all these little red dots, those are fixes that I would propose. So let's say this landowner said, oh, that's cool, come on up and let's do this.
Okay.
I'd go back and try to write a grant proposal to cover the project cost through the Farm Bill money.
Okay.
And the landowner was responsible to pay 25% of the cost. And many of them were not adverse to that.
Right.
Now, whether that money still gets to those uses, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'd have to check. I'm not sure.
Right.
But when I left Zinnia, that was one of the backbones of getting the projects done, besides, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service paid for this report.
Okay. The work still is going on, though, right? It hasn't been...
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a wonderful restorationist from Garberville. And she was a real motivator in getting people to do things. And she was tied in real well with Fish and Wildlife, California Fish and Wildlife. At the time, Fish and Game, who some of the money went through. There were, proposition monies. Yeah. And so there were a lot of different pots. And Ruth was just great. I mean, she got people motivated and was just a real moving force. And you miss people like her. Today, greed is so prevalent in the business that these people don't want anybody around their properties, per se. So
I just want to interrupt real quick. Yeah. Bruce could be right. I'm not finding anything on the rats on any of the counties up there. They're basically, and they're even talking about how they're finding dead fowl with the rodent pesticide mixture inside of, and they're like killing their liver and kidneys of the fowl.
So they're destroying their environment up there with these grows that aren't regulated.
Yes,
because now everybody has to be regulated. Everybody has to be licensed. Apparently, it costs quite a bit of money to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of illegal grows out there still, but they are targeting them. They're not just letting them get away with it, as far as I know. The bigger ones they have, and I think one of the more effective things is they're not prosecuting them on growing dope. They're prosecuting them on, they're issuing citations.
Yeah.
Clean Water Act violations. You diverted a stream, let's say your growing period is 5 months, so it's 160 days or what have you, at $10,000 a day. So these start to add, you put some pesticide on the ground, that's another, so many thousand a day. So when you're done adding this up, you may as well walk away. That's, that's not going to happen.
Right.
And now whether, I'm interested in finding out if the counties are being effective in collecting that money that they issued for that.
Yeah.
But I think that was one of the better tools they could use to address some of these huge illegal grows that are up there.
That's smart.
And the people that are trying to get licensed now, really, the counties don't know what they're doing. And Mendocino County's regs and Humboldt County's regs could be different. And they're just not really, they haven't figured it all out yet on how to do this whole thing about regulating marijuana.
Right.
And so I still think it's pretty iffy. The 215 gave you a right to grow X amount of plants.
Yeah.
Well, there might be a grower up there. It could be that many.
It depends on the county. Yeah. It was different. That was the weird thing about California, is it literally differed depending on whatever county you're living in.
I watched. It was that show that Bill O'Reilly was back in the day. It's that same current edition or something like that.
Yeah.
One of the things I was watching last night was, I think the guy said, I can grow 16 plants now.
It depends on the county.
Well, yeah, but he was in the Emerald Triangle, though. He was up in... I want to say he was in Mendocino or Helmholtz.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. Only because if you watch the end of Murder Mountain, on the very last episode, they show that the legal growers, the guys who were doing it legally, in fact, they show one almost get raided by accident. The cops show up at the wrong address. And these guys are crapping themselves.
Well, yeah, but this was the guy that he wasn't illegal and he wasn't a pot store. It was like that. They talked about how he was in the gray area. And like he had it in his backyard or on his property.
I could see that. I mean,
I think it was 16. Like it was just us,
in Sacramento guys. In Sacramento here, it's 9. You go into different counties, it can be.
I think 50, it's 6 in Rancho Cordova.
See, so it's.
But changes. I mean, with today's plants,
you're
getting tons of poundage off of each plant.
Right.
So if you can grow 6 plants, I mean,
that's the problem. Is
you're hard to smoke that much pot in a year, okay?
It's not really, no, because they want, in Sacramento, it's 9, but it's supposed to be indoor. Well, indoor limits the size of the plant severely.
Right.
Sure, you're right. If you can do an outdoor and you can have a 600-gallon container out back, then yeah, you might get some poundage out of one plant. But that everybody in the neighborhood would smell you.
Right.
Sure. Sure. Well, there used to be a time when the 215s became popular that you give your 215, like I'd give you a 215.
Yeah, and you could grow for somebody else.
Pin it up in your greenhouse or whatever. Yeah. And so there's 6 for this guy, 10 for this guy, so all of a sudden you got 100 plants.
That's the way the dispensaries were doing it for, that's why they always took a copy of your thing, because they would use that in their grows. But, so you think the name, the Murder Mountain, is it warranted for that area? I certainly... I haven't looked up the statistics, but I don't think it could compete with any of the major cities in California. You know?
I liked Leggett because that was the time of back to the Landers.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't talked about it, but when meth started to come into the grow scene, you know, not just cocaine, but methamphetamine. So whenever that started to commingle, then areas like Alderpoint, Rancho Sequoia, they became places that they weren't stable. You know, they were run by unstable people. And the place I bought in Xenia, I bought from the U.S. Marshal. And it was from a guy who grew a few plants. And one time and he was a professional drinker. I mean, this guy, when I got the place, we took 5, the smaller dump trucks, say 5-yard, wine and beer bottles to the dump. 5 loads. I mean, stacked as high as this house. Like, it was huge. Wow. And the guy came up to put propane in his tank. And I guess they got in an argument, and this guy started shooting over his head with a shotgun. Well, needless to say, he didn't get any propane. The way things would work up there, you had justices of the peace in the old days. Not, you know, this is rural Trinity County. So the community didn't like this guy. And so one of the guys who was a justice of the peace and a multi-generational rancher up there just called the sheriff and said, make him go away. And he went away, and they took his place, and then I bought it from the marshal. So I think a lot of times that's kind of what happened. There was some real friction when they started doing, they used to do what were called diesel dopers. They'd have big diesel generators, and they'd have tents, old army tents in the woods, and they would grow pot in that. I mean, God, fire danger RX a lot, you know. And a lot of the people, particularly the movement started just outside of Redway, where some of the original pot was grown. And so you ended up having growers turning in growers, you know.
Ratting on each other.
You know, you put the diesel, they do hot fuel transfers, and diesel would spill and get into the creek or the, you know, the spring area. So that wasn't uncommon. And it just showed the fraying of the fabric.
Did you see a ton of what they called trimmigrants in your time period?
Not that much as there are today. You had a family that you worked with, and the family would, you know, they'd come up and they'd do stuff, but it wasn't people who would come up and just looking for jobs as trimmers. They were known by the people who hired them.
You had to know
old friends. You know, it's a network. It's I mean, it's a whole family network.
I had a friend.
So, I know now that I know people who are from Finland and other like countries that come to just trim for 2.5 months or whatever it is, and they go back to wherever they're from.
Wow.
Yeah, you can make some, you know, good trim people can make some money.
I know an ex-college professor, Bill, he passed away years ago, but he told me that when he was a kid, he used to go up to one of his cousin's place and, you know, that time of year and help him harvest and trim. And the rule was you could keep whatever stuck to your hands.
Well, that's when you got the good finger hash in those days.
Yeah.
Ooh, the end of the day, people scraping that hash off of their fingers. Yeah. Ooh, wee. Yeah, that was tasty. But, you know, like the operation down below me in Xenia, a guy making water hash, he'd get all the shake and old leaf and everything, and he'd turn out this water hash. Very good. And it was a product everybody was throwing away. So,
how do they actually make that?
You get some. I'm not totally familiar. I watched an operation once. You put the dope in ice water in a garbage can, and you plunge it, and then you take like cheesecloth and you can squeeze it out, and somehow it goes from there. Beyond that, I'm not real sure. It is the same guy that he wanted. This was an interesting idea. He wanted, he had a place down in Panama, and he wanted to stay down there and build a house. And so he took his trail mix, you know. I mean, everybody has trail mix. But he rolled all these little hash balls that looked like raisins, and he stuffed them in his trail mix. And that was the way he got his hash down to his place.
That's awesome.
I thought that was pretty ingenious.
That is. It's ballsy, too.
Might be a little salty. Depending on what kind you got, or the M&M's melted on it.
What's the time check on this? I know you're looking at the clock there, Jared.
I think we're at right about an hour.
Right about an hour. All right. We can wrap it up then. It's so just to wrap this whole thing up, this was about Alderpoint, aka Murder Mountain, which what you said. What was the area that actually deserves that name a little more?
A little subdivision called Rancho Sequoia, which is up a little bit from there.
Is the more dangerous area. And we've got somebody who was part of the community for 35 years or so. It's
I mean, my office was there, my post office box was there, the grocery store was there. My contractor had half of the town he owned down there. He came from a long history of people.
I thought it was interesting you said how long it took you to get from one place to another. Because, like, there's no freeways up there. It's all just 2-lane roads.
Yeah, it's measured in hours.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you leave Garberville, you know, you could get out of Garberville and up to maybe where Bell Springs Road is. And then after you get down into Alderpoint, you're in second gear. The Zinnia Bluff Road, which was the road that left Alderpoint essentially, and a mile up the road. And if you went off the cliff, you're going down 800 feet.
Wow. So
it's not one you want to be drunk and stoned on at nighttime. And so it was a lot of second gear, a lot of slow driving. Wow. But, you know, even in Zinnia, the people were pretty cool. You know, I enjoyed some of the, because I worked with people who had owned land for a long time.
Yeah.
That was pretty fun. The hardest people to work with in Alderpoint, there was a group called MERG, M-E-R-G, Main Stem Eel River Group. And pardon me, but this little group that together, these 20 people, don't own 500 acres. And I'm busting my butt trying to convince them to do these things, and they're fighting me. And then it dawned on me, wait a minute, these people that have the big ranches, they want you up there. So, I mean, I deal with one property owner, and he's got 50 times more than this whole little group down there that thought they knew how to do restoration, and they had all the answers, and quite frankly, they just didn't. So, it's a tenor. That's kind of the flavor you get out of Alderpoint, as opposed to, you know, earlier experiences in the back of the land. So finally, I just concentrated on the bigger ranchers.
Go where you're wanted.
Exactly. Yeah, and they said, "Come on, we'll set you up in an office up here, and we'll do all this stuff." And they were very appreciative. And it's kind of cool when you see that. One of the other things, though, we may be going overtime here, but these big ranchers wouldn't be dope growers. Maybe. But let's say you want to put in 100 plants. So you ask them, hey man, can I grow some pot on your land? I don't know anything about it. You know, I said, I don't know. If they come to bus, I'm with the bus team. I don't care. You know. But if you pull it out, I'm taking a cut. And so that was what a lot of these larger ranches, how the growers would work with the rancher itself, you know.
Yeah. Kind of like a backdoor deal or a backroom deal type thing where I don't know nothing, but I want my 15%.
Exactly.
That's exactly it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the whole name Murder Mountain, I know in the movie there were I think, I could be completely wrong on the documentary series, there was 2 murders, one missing girl is a possible suicide, maybe 3 murders. I could be missing one that was in there. It was a long series. I'm not sure what, if Murder Mountain is warranted.
Well, I think the stuff I was kind of watching was like the coverage of Murder Mountain from other outlets. When they were saying there was 217 missing people since whatever it was, 1996 or something like that, that the sheriff was saying like probably 150 of them, I think you said earlier off camera, were people that went up there to grow and were like, I'm done with this, and left.
Yeah. I
just didn't tell anyone. And it was like, they're not missing, a lot of them weren't missing from like Ohio, they're missing from there.
Yeah.
It was like they were just the people that were there to help with the trim and then leave. They just didn't have a good time or whatever. Now, like I said, there's the one they call them the Emerald Five that they can't figure out how they are, where they are.
Was that the vigilante group there?
No, it's the one that's where they thought the serial killer had done it, or they thought that there was like an older gentleman who was a serial killer that lived up there. There's like 5 women that came up missing over a certain time frame, and they really think they know. Even the sheriff said and I can't remember what the guy's name was he's a person of interest, because it became one of those things where he dated one and he said she just disappeared. Then it was like there was like a girl who was a babysitter for like multiple people, but the last time she was seen was with him, and there's somebody else. So it was like one of those things where that's really, I think, one of the things that's somebody in one of them said it should be called Missing Mountain, not Murder Mountain.
Yeah.
And I thought that probably is more of the appropriate thing, because it seems like they were talking about all these people who were missing that really could or could not be missing, because even the sheriff said, again, he said it's like 100 to 150 that were just they're just here, and sometimes some of these people were literally listed as Phil because no one knew their last name.
That's what I wonder if it's if you did a study here in Sacramento, just how many missing. I'm sure the numbers are probably out there. But, and again, like you said, there are a certain group, especially a transient population, that's not really tracked. Trimmigrants, right? The hippie kids. They used to what they used to call the festival circuit that they ran on.
Yeah.
And when I first got here to Sacramento 20 years ago, it was summertime. You would see these kids. They all had dreadlocks and and the hippie dresses and.
Well, they had the reggae festival started in Garberville.
Yeah.
And, broker and weed was that's what the reason for it there. You had people coming up from the Bay Area and buyers, and you had growers down doing the reggae festival. Yeah. And it was kind of the New York Stock Exchange of weed in Humboldt County, it was where all the trades would happen.
Well, let's say, isn't the old Emerald Triangle considered to be the best weed in the world?
They like to think so. May as well. There's some excellent genetics, let me tell you that.
It's probably the biggest grow, and maybe in North America, like for one little corner. Mm-hmm. If there's another area, and we don't know about it, and it should probably stay that way, otherwise they'll get busted. But
I know a friend spent part of last summer in Amsterdam, and he said the weed was horrible.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
They thought it was great, and then he said, I'm from California, and they went, you're not going to like this.
God, that's a shame. What about I've always heard growing up about Hawaiian weed.
That's funny. I knew a guy who would come over here and buy weed, take it back to Hawaii, and turn around and sell it as Hawaii weed.
What?
Over in Hawaii.
That's funny.
That is funny.
That's interesting. But one of the issues that, about the murders and stuff, I personally didn't hear, you murder somebody, you're not going to go telling it at the general store in Alderpoint that you off somebody.
No, but you were part of a community that actually met once a week. So people talk about obviously more than, just the environment, and the work that you're doing. And something like a murder or a missing person,
would come up.
Would come up.
Would come up. But keep in mind, this is 20 years difference.
Yeah.
When we had the co-op, what we talk about is, how's your construction going? You know, how is your... In those days, everybody had outlaw houses.
What year did you leave that whole area?
Pardon me?
What year did you leave it? And not necessarily when you sold, but the last time you were really up there on a regular basis.
God, now you're asking me tough questions.
90s?
2000.
Early
2000. Come on, Brian, you can work. 2000, maybe 5, 6.
So you were there. What do you call it? Still when all the outlaw grows were going.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But the biggest impact on me is I lost great friends to drug overdoses. And they were out of Alderpoint.
That was something that I found shocking. You mentioned this before, but you would think with all the marijuana surrounding you in a place like that, at probably, bargain prices, if you don't grow your own, why would you do anything but that? But from what you've told me, you lost 2 friends to, was it heroin?
One was a heroin overdose, the other was meth.
The
one that died of meth was my contractor. He was an amazing guy, but yet once he started, smoking crack, life changed for him big time. And it was bad because that was my hardest job. Without Dink, I would not have undertaken any other projects because in order to work for me, everybody up there's got a backhoe and a dozer. Okay, they're a dime a dozen. You can't put a piece of equipment inside a stream if it has any oil leaks. None.
Yeah.
And my contractor was the only guy who had equipment that he would keep in a repair because he was really excited about doing restoration before he started smoking again.
How the hell did this guy was a grown adult, when he started doing the crack. Was he a biker or something? I mean,
no, he was a heavy equipment operator, and his family was maybe 3rd generation Alderpoint. So he would fix roads, he would dig septics, he would do things like that.
Yeah.
And when you're 3rd or 4th generation, you don't have a lot of debt load.
Yeah. And
so you don't need a lot of money. And although Dink was probably a pretty good sized grower, things just get away. You know how it is. I mean, here's some heroin. You want to try it?
Wow.
Or here's the pipe. You want to smoke on it? And it's pretty vicious. So that's where it affected me in terms of hearing about people murdered when I was in the Alderpoint. Yeah, no. And when I was in the Mendocino County area, that was so far back that it was
non-existent.
Non-existent. They started at the end to talk about rip-offs, what's happening. But it wasn't near like it is today. So I hope they can manage to get a control, that the regulations come in so that water continues to flow down to the main stem in a clean state. To me, that's real important.
I think with regulation, they're gonna eventually have to bring that area into
Yeah, and then the proctoring of it. You're going to have to proctor it. It's like meat inspectors going around. What if they go around once a month to a meat factory or whatever that is? I mean, you're going to need that kind of thing, both to keep things legit, but also to guarantee
nobody's using pesticides.
People are getting what they want. Mine's sun-grown organic pot. Ain't happening. There's a lot of fertilizers and stuff like that are used. So you need to have some kind of a regulatory arm on it, and it needs to be supported by the growers, and not, against the growers. But the counties just don't have that together quite yet. And I hope they do. I mean, I hope they learn a lot.
This whole thing is in its infancy, especially with the mass legalization. I mean, this is the first year for it. So
yeah,
I'm sure they'll get their act together, and hopefully what was once a semi-lawless, area will calm down.
Yeah.
become just another farming community.
Yeah, another 100 years from now, a guy will say, "Hey, I'm fourth generation pot grower." You know?
We got apples over in that orchard because
Exactly.
they're doing good this year. You know, it's just be another crop. That's the way it should be.
I think one of the things too that affects it probably today and in the last couple of years has been the price. I mean, there's so much unsold weed around that
they're taking it to other states and selling it illegally.
And one of the things that I watched last night was one of the guys said that what the price was in, I don't know, whatever, 95, 96 when 215 passed to, I think this was back in November of 2017, was it's basically in half.
Yeah.
So in basically 20 or 21 years, the price of weed on the street has been cut in half.
If you go back and watch a movie called Half Baked, I think they make reference to ounces, of it, it being sold in New York for like $500. This is like a late 90s movie type of thing, right? Here in Northern California, delivery services can bring it to you for $100 or less per an ounce.
Yeah, it's quite a difference in time.
So
I may have known some people who've had many deliveries of weed, and I can tell you sometimes it's way less than $100, and this might have been a couple of years ago.
But it's just amazing what's happened, then and now. I remember watching Half Baked and going, come on, somebody delivering it to your house, and thought it was far-fetched, although I'm sure they had it even back then, illegally. The fact that it's legal now and, somebody can just show up and...
Oh, I think I kind of remember, growing up in Rancho Cordova, there was a guy that was the guy, and you would...
Well, yeah, I mean...
He'd bring it to you.
If you knew a deal that's...
Of course, he'd also want to smoke with you, too, so it was like a little double-edged...
Isn't that always the way it was?
Yeah.
That was my friend Ruth, the great restorationist on the South Fork of the Eel. She would go kind of where it all started out near Redway. There was a tributary that had a lot of land up there. And she would go and she'd be writing up these plans on how they could improve their property and do all of this stuff. And she says to me one day, she says, Bruce, getting the write-up was the hardest part. I'd have to go back 3 times because I was so stoned after each time. They'd say, hey, try this,
yeah. That's funny.
Oh, I forgot to ask them this,
Parts of the job.
Well,
all right. We got to eventually wrap this one up, but we can keep talking all night with Bruce.
Right.
I want to thank Bruce again for coming out tonight and
all fun.
Giving us the inside scoop on Alderpoint, at least up until about 2005. You said
somewhere in that was when I left. Yeah. Now talk about this shirt.
Yeah, he's got a 4th annual Harvest Festival shirt.
Interesting. And this was in 1980. Does that say?
Yes,
1980. So the first one was in 1976. And it started with a couple of guy out hot tubbing and having a joint with his wife. And a buddy pulls up and he goes to get in and he says, hey, try this. And he goes, oh man, I got some stash I just harvested. And he ran out and grabbed it out of the glove box of his car. And so they smoked and they said, comparatively, oh, looks good, and smokes. And so that was the start of the harvest festivals. And it started actually in Sonoma County, in West County. And this year, the 4th annual one was interesting. It'd be kind of like wine tasting. Growers would submit their pot to a group of judges. They would end up weeding it, interesting term.
No pun intended there, Bruce.
Down to 20 participants. And so, you remember those old beautiful wooden in boxes you'd put paper in? Yeah. They had those. And so they would, each strain had a number. And there would be, in the box, there'd be some papers, some scissors, and some buds. So you'd have this sheet like you're doing wine, you know, appearance, stoniness, smell, and you'd have all these things. You grade them. Well, I mean, the grading got, you know, after 2 hits and the joint turns brown, you know, you're pretty hard measuring. So anyway, you do your best, you know, and so then they'd take all the sheets at the end of the party, and they would go back and tabulate who were the winner, and you know, you might get highest density. So you know, you get the highest density award. Somebody you get the best looking award, and you know, and that's kind of where the festival went. So High Times sent a writer and a photographer out to this event, and it was pretty interesting. You got to the festival, people who were invited, very tight-knit group, would meet in a parking lot somewhere, a long way away. And they would put you in a van, and they would blindfold you. And they would drive around, say, for 45 minutes when the place that the party's going to be is only 2 miles down the road. And then you would end up at this place you've never seen before. They let you out of the van, you take your blindfold off, and go in and start the party. Yeah. So it was pretty, you know, kind of interesting the way that happened. So the guy who was the photographer from High Times, he didn't smoke at all. And he says, no, I can't photograph and be stoned. The writer, on the other hand, sampled all 20 blends of those. How he remembered anything. Anyway, they wrote a good article in High Times, so that must have been 1980-ish.
1980, that would have been amazing, because 1980 was just like
the
Gestapo days of weed.
You go to jail for that, you know. I mean, that's why it was so secret. I mean, you go to...
So this year could be the 44th annual Harvest Fest.
I don't know if they're doing it anymore.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it kind of word got out about it, and so... You know, why get the exposure, these guys thought? You know, we don't need that. So
39 years.
They just kind of gave it up. You know, one of the parts of the industry, too, that I think is, you know, not talked about much. In the old days, you used to have packing labels, and you'd put a label of your pot in every pound.
Yeah. And
there were some killer labels. I think I showed you one.
You have
one there. You know, they were killer. And today, you know, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, and of course there was a problem if somebody got busted and they saw your label, you know, I mean, it'd make it easier to backtrack it. But I'm sorry to see those, because they were patterned after the old fruit box labels. They were on the sides, you know.
The old orange crates.
Yeah, exactly. And so as an artistic piece of the industry, that kind of died by the wayside.
There's a whole new side to that, though. With all the crazy products, if you go into dispensaries, there's so many products.
Today?
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yes.
Blueberry Kush.
Not just the strains, but the actual different products you go in there. There's so many different ways to ingest this. You have the vape pens, you have the dabs, there's flour, then there's ice creams, there's sodas, there's cookies, candies, gummies. There's dog treats for, you know, I mean, it's crazy. It's like going to a grocery store, these places.
Well, I heard the other day, I don't know how true it is, but there's a report out of Colorado that, you know, people who are used to smoking a joint would eat some of these gummies. Yeah. You know, which could take, you know, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour to get an effect. Yeah. So, you know, used to having a smoke where the effect is much quicker. Yeah. They're going, well, geez, I didn't seem to feel that, so I ate some more, or I didn't seem to feel that. So actually, there's people who are going to the hospital
overdosing on them.
And I mean, I never have heard of an overdose from a smoker.
Right.
You know, you go to sleep. That's about what happens.
Did you ever see the cop or hear the cop phone call of the overdose? There's this has got to be 10, 12, maybe 15 years old by now, but there's a cop who took some weed from an evidence room and took it home, and him and his wife made brownies. And they ate like the whole pan. And then they thought they were dying. He thought, and so he ended up calling 911 or calling an ambulance. it's all over YouTube. You can look it up. I'll send it to you. It's
see, and I have a friend who's he's a cop in the South. Let's just put it that way. He has teenagers. He has a boy and a girl that are teenagers. Well, they're at that age. Well, one day, him and the son had plans, and he was in the son's room. I don't think he was snooping. He was just kind of like hanging out, like waiting for his kid. And he saw gummy bears on his desk.
Oh, shit.
And he ate half a bag of weed gummy bears, not knowing that they were weed gummy bears, and couldn't figure out why he felt so all weird and like goofy. And his wife's like,
"Really?
Are you high?" And he was like, "No." And then the boy comes around the corner and is like, "Oh, Mom, Dad ate my weed gummy bears that I got."
Yeah, so I've never been affected. I just don't know. I've been not a brownie eater. That's about it.
Yeah, I've heard everything affects people differently. I've heard some guys get like absolutely like knocked unconscious from it or devastated and all that. It all depends on
I know a lady who ate some. Wasn't not a doper, never smoked, but she wanted to try a brownie, so she ate a brownie, and she went off. And she tells that she was stoned for 3 days,
I believe that.
And so this buddy of mine's going, she's telling the story. And yeah, he was like, for 3 days. I couldn't believe it. And the guy looked at her and he goes, where can I get some of that stuff? I mean, that sounds like good stuff.
It's the, we're going to sign off for this. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Yeah.